Hello, everyone. It is the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started on our webinar today. I want to thank all of you for joining me. My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm with MadCap Software, and today I am so thrilled to have Scott Deloach on with us. He's a certified Flare instructor and consultant extraordinaire, as I like to call him, on with us. And Scott's been teaching and consulting on Flare for years, and he's a regular presenter at industry conferences, including our own Mad World conference, where he will be presenting again this year. And today, Scott's going to talk about single sourcing best practices with multiple MadCap Flare projects. And this is one of those areas where there's so much possibility for reuse. And he's going to talk through ways to optimize the process of sharing content between Flare projects, including global project linking, external resources, merged projects, and more. So if you've never heard of these terms, or if you've heard of them and you're not quite sure how to best approach these techniques, well, then you're in the right place. So welcome, Scott. I'm so honored to have you join us today. We have a lot to cover, so just some quick housekeeping items before we begin. Reminder, this will be recorded. So as soon as everything's done, we're going to compile it all and send it to everybody who's registered. So if you have to pop out early, that's fine. You'll get a link to the recording. There's also a questions panel in this GoToWebinar console that you've logged into. So I would encourage you, if you have questions that come up as you're watching, jot them down. We will do our best to get to what we can during the webinar, and of course towards the end we're going to leave time for questions. Whatever we don't get to, don't hold back. Just keep the questions coming. We'll send a question and answer document out to everybody at the end along with the recording. So keep jotting them down. We want to hear from you. All right, so like I said, a lot to cover. So Scott, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Rachel. And as Jen mentioned, feel free to type questions in the chat. I can't see them, so as Jen mentioned, she'll gather them up and ask. So if you ask a question, I wonder if I've answered it. I can't answer it till the end, but go ahead and type them in. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 ways that you can share content in Flare projects. And what I'll do is I'll kind of describe them in PowerPoint a little bit, then we'll switch over to Flare and I'll show you how you could set it up. So we'll be going back and forth between PowerPoint and Flare. We're going to start out with the most common way to share content between Flare projects, and that would be I have some content in one project, I want to use it in another project, and we typically would do that with something called an import file. So to kind of give you a visual, at first you're going to have a project. I mean, sometimes you know right away, hey, I need 3 projects, and you start with 3 projects. But usually most people start with one project and they release that, it's out there. Let's say it's, for my example, be product A. So you document a product A with a project, and then at some point someone said, hey, we need some documentation, a website or whatever for product B. And you realize, hey, there's some content in the initial project that I now want to use in my new project. Okay, so you might have project A and project B. Now, there's going to be a big temptation right here, and a very easy mistake to make is something I'm tempted by it all the time. It's a common thing I see people do. You create project B. You realize there's content in project A that you want to use. Maybe it's topics, images, whatever it is. So you think, oh, okay, no problem. I'll just bring that content in from project A to project B. Problem solved. I'm reusing it, and it seems okay. But the mistake with that is it's not very far-sighted. Just with this example, at some point, you're going to have content in project B that you want to use in project A. And your solution might be, all right, well, sure, no problem. I'll just bring in content from B into A. All right, well, it's already getting a little messy. There's a problem with even this, this small example is, I know that I have some content that's shared, but it's hard to keep up with what you're sharing. And then if you realize, oh yeah, I know that I reuse that, let's say it's a topic. I know I reuse that topic. You want to update it. Is the original one in project A or is the original one in project B? Sometimes it might be in A, sometimes it might be in B. You really need to change the source version and then bring it back into the other project. But even with only 2 projects, you never know. It could be in A or it could be in B. It might not even be shared. That's a lot to keep up with. And if you make a mistake, it's going to be a pain. You're going to get out of sync, and it's just going to cause problems. Now, you can imagine we're successful. Somehow we made that work. And now we want to have a project C. All right, well, you can keep going. Hey, I have some content from A I need in C. Well, wait a minute. I need something from B into C. Oh, there's something in C I need in A. Oh, and there's something in C I need in B. It's just getting worse and worse. I'm not even going to draw it out with a project B because it's too depressing, and the drawing would be so gross. It'd be like a spider's web. So you don't want to do this. It's just going to make a mess. It's not efficient. So right there, when you have project B, or even at the very, very beginning, if you realize, all right, I'm only going to have one project right now, but I bet sometime in the future I'm going to have two projects. Even at the very beginning when you'll have one project, what would be much better is to make another project just to store the content you want to share. And we typically call that a global project. You can call it whatever you want, but conceptually, it's normally called a global project. Okay, so here's the structure of the global project. Any files you want to share, you put them in this global project. So if you want to think of this concept as a shared content project or a company-wide project, sure. Some people call it a master project. Okay, but we're isolating all the shared content into this global project. So one easy benefit of that is I know right away if something's shared and I need to change it, I need to change it in a global project. I don't have to wonder, is the source version in A, the source version in B, the source version in C? It's always in the global project. There's no question. If I'm not sure if it's shared or not, I open the global project. If it's not in there, it's not shared. No big deal, easy to tell. And this scales really well. If you have a project B and a project A and a project C, sure, you can have project Z if you want to. It'd be the same structure. It'd be easy to add another project. Just bring in what you want from the global project. Now, when you're bringing in content from another project, I'll show you something you might be wondering about if you haven't set this up. You don't have to bring over everything. You get to pick what you import from, in this case, the global project. So if you're worried, like, well, maybe there's some things I don't want in project B, don't bring them in. Just bring in what you want from the global project into A, B, and C. If you want everything, sure, you can bring over everything. You want just the topics, bring in just the topics. It's totally up to you. There's no real restrictions there. And we can even automate, as I'm about to show you, updating it. So if I change something in the global project and I want to get the change now into A, B, and C, we can automate that to some extent. And you can, of course, always manually update A, B, and C if something changes in global. But before I show you the details of setting this up, I want to point out another big advantage of this. Those arrows are only going one way. I think that's really important because with this model, or just really with the whole idea of using an import file, but hopefully you'll set it up this way, it doesn't go back. So if I bring something into A from global, and I mess it up, which I could do, I mean, you have to work at it, but you could mess it up if you really tried. It doesn't mess up what's in global. It doesn't mess up B. It doesn't mess up C. So just because you bring something into A and then totally ruin it, yeah, okay, so project A is messed up. Everybody else is still safe, and we can easily tell that we did that, and we can re-import and fix A back. So there's a lot of protection here. Maybe you work with coworkers and your project's A and somebody else has B and somebody else has C and you think, well, I don't know if I trust my coworkers with this because somebody might bring something in their project to mess it up. All right, well, if they do that, that's their problem. It doesn't mess your project up. The only way they can mess everybody up is if they open the global project and change it. Now, if you're worried about that, well, you can restrict who has access to the global project. With that other drawing I showed you, if we have the source stored in A, B, or C, it'd be very easy to mess it up. You just open a project, change something, you might be messing up B and C. With this one, you have to open global to change the shared file to begin with. And if you can't even open global and change things, we could set that up in Windows or source control, however you want to protect it. they can't mess up anybody else. And I see that a lot with groups. Only certain people can even change things in the global project. So you can be that extreme if you need to. Now, the how part of it, how do we do this? Now let's go over to Flare and take a look. Okay, so here's Flare. And this is my Project A example. I want to pull in some files from my global project. And what we're going to create is a Flare import file. Okay, so that's just file new. Creating a Flare import file. Okay. I name mine global, just like I name the actual global project global, but again, it's up to you what you want to name. So I'm going to name the import file global. We're doing two things. I think this confuses a lot of people just in general with importing. First, you make an import file. That's what I'm doing right now. And then we set up the import file to tell it where we want to import from. So they're kind of two separate steps. Make the import file, which I'm going to name the import file itself global. Okay. Now in the import file, I tell it where the other project is. Easy mistake people make with import files, whether it's from Word or FrameMaker or what I'm doing now. When you're making the import file, you're not at this point. You don't click browse and go find the other project. It's a very, very easy mistake to make. That doesn't happen until you're setting up the import file. So now here on the source project, now I go find the other projects. So now I need to go find a global project. I made one just to show you. Now, a global project could be anywhere. I have it, of course, on my computer, but it could be off on the X drive or wherever you want to keep it. And yes, it could be in source control like everything else. So here's mine. As you can see, I named it global. All right, so now Flare knows how to find it. And we have a couple of options setting it up. The auto reimport is something I kind of hinted at. I would leave that checked. So auto reimport says, all right, you're going to bring in some files from global, maybe a whole bunch of files, maybe one file, it's up to you. But later on, if you change one of those files in global, as long as you checked auto reimport, every time I build a target here in Project A, Flare will go check to see if I changed one of the global files. If I did, it'll re-import it back into this child project. So if I build, I only have one target, but if I go build my target after I've imported some files, then Flare will re-import them. All right, so let's leave that checked. The two delete options, a stale file would be brought over a file from the global project and then it ended up deleting it in the global project. It's a little unusual that you delete a shared file, but it could theoretically it could happen. I think usually if you deleted it, you don't need it in the child. So I normally check that. The unreferenced kind of ties the include. So let me tell you about the include. So include could be star.star, bring over everything from the global project, sure. Or it could be the opposite end, really, really specific and type in a file name. This happens to be a topic. So that would just bring over that one file, or you can chain them together. As an example, there's a semicolon that says bring in the topic named overview and a style sheet named my styles. But let's go with this example. What if I brought over these two files? And then I realized, oh, I don't need this style sheet. So first I imported, brought in these two files. Then I deleted one from the include list. If I have delete unreferenced checked, then you're telling Flare, oh, I don't need that style sheet in the child anymore, take it out. I don't normally do that because it gets a little confusing. Maybe you accidentally removed my styles. You didn't mean to. Well, now if you made one mistake here by deleting that and you check this, now you kind of made two mistakes. Oh, I shouldn't have said don't bring over my styles, and now not only that, I don't even have it in my child anymore. So to kind of prevent two mistakes, I don't like to check delete unreferenced. I'd rather catch the error and fix it. I'm going to show you a trick with the include. This is something I do in a lot of my projects, and it makes it more efficient, and it has some kind of ripple effects that pay off too. My imaginary company here is called XYZ. So in my global project, if I have company-wide files, then I would prefix them with XYZ. So maybe I have a style sheet. I would name it something like XYZ_styles. Or a page layout, I might name it XYZ_page layout. XYZ_skin, XYZ_, you can see where I'm going. Master page, whatever you want. I like that. One payoff, as we'll see, when I bring the files into the child project, if they start with XYZ, I know right away, oh, that's company-wide. I don't change it here, I have to go change it in global. Don't want to mess with that. But also, it makes the include easier, because I can use those asterisks again. I could say XYZ star and find everything that has XYZ as a prefix. Okay, so let's see what we get. I always check auto include as well, and that's going to be useful, well, especially with a topic. If you bring in a topic might need condition tags, variables, snippets, images. So if you check auto include linked files, Flare will look through whatever you're bringing over, in my example, a topic, and if it needs an image, condition tag, a variable, or snippet, it makes sure it brings over those files too. If you don't check that and your topic uses, say, an image, well, you don't have the image and it's not going to appear in the child project. So rather than me having to round them all up and include them up here, I just check auto include and let Flare do the work for me. So that's pretty much it, setting it up. A quick import. Save my import file. Flare goes and takes a look at the global project. And you can see I named a whole bunch of things XYZ as I was giving you as examples. Click accept. And it added them to our child project. It's going to put them wherever they were stored in the global project. So the style sheet was stored in the style sheets folder. That's where it put it. Page layouts in there. You can see it's kind of organized already. Very subtle, I'll point this out. It may be a little hard to see on my screen. I zoomed in as much as I could, so I have the highest resolution I can have, but if you can't see it, it has a little chain icon on it, so that's Flare saying, hey, this is linked to the global project. And if you open one of these files, you also see it on the tab. It is very subtle, but it is Flare trying to tell you that it's linked. If you try to change it, then you get this big message. So this is kind of Flare's warning. You're not supposed to be changing this file in the child project. Click cancel. Go, if you really want to change it, go open it in global, change it. I'm not going to go change it, but you can pretend. And then if I build my target, then Flare would re-import it. If I just can't wait, or maybe I don't build very often, I click re-import. Flare would know it had changed. The box would be checked. It would overwrite the old one with the new one. They haven't changed, of course, so none of them are checked. I kind of a gotcha with this, just a kind of a best practice. The whole idea is we're trying to change these in one place, in the global project. So I should not be changing these files in the child project. If I do, then they're not the same anymore. That kind of breaks the whole concept. Now, changing it also means you shouldn't be changing its file name. So if you look at it and say, I don't like the name of that, well, tough. You want to change it, go change it in global and re-import it. You also shouldn't move it around. So if the style sheet, I think it makes sense for the style sheet to be there, but if you thought, I want the style sheet to be somewhere else, again, tough. You don't like it there, you're going to have to go move it in the global project and re-import it. You don't change it at all in the child project. If you rename it or you move it, when you re-import, Flare assumes, okay, you want to keep whatever you did to it, and you want a new one. So if I rename this example and re-import, I still have a style sheet named example, and now I have another copy of XYZ styles. Flare won't realize you renamed it and overwrite the renamed one. It just adds a new one that matches. That's intentional. It's going to assume that's what you wanted to do. It may not be what you wanted to do, but that's what it assumes you want it to do. So you got to leave them where they are. You got to leave them with their name. You can't change the content in them. All that needs to be done in the global project. It's kind of forcing you to be extremely consistent. That's the whole goal anyway. So that's the most common way to share files between projects. But we have some other things, special cases, that I want to show you as well. Okay, so our next one would be, all right, I have some content, I want to use it, but it's not in another Flare project. If it's in another Flare project, do what we just did. You import it with a Flare import file. But if it's not in a Flare project, you can't import it with a Flare import file. But we can do something else. We can bring it in as something called an external resource. Okay, so the idea here, maybe there's some file in SharePoint or on some network drive, and you want to add it to your project. Okay. I will be showing where all the files live, don't worry. Okay, so with an external resource, it might be on SharePoint and network drive. It's not on a website or something like that, but something that you could map a drive to, right? And we could bring it into Project A. I'll show you how to do that. One thing to keep in mind with an external resource, so with an external resource, you can see the arrow does go both ways. Typically, when we're sharing files as an external resource, we want to bring them into our project and just reuse them. In other words, somebody else owns it. I'm just using it. I'm not going to change it. But we could take advantage of this. We could change it if we want to. Okay, let's see how this works. Okay, and our impatience of seeing where the file is stored. It's stored in the imports folder, as I suspect you already knew. That's where the import files are stored. You have as many import files as you want. Each one will be separate in the imports folder in the project organizer. Now, to bring in an external resource, we need to open the external resources pane. Typically opens on the left. I don't have it open right now. And I'm going to go to the project menu in the ribbon. And one of the last buttons in the project ribbon is external resources. Let me open it up and show you. All right. Okay, we need to go find the file that we want to add to our project. Here in the external resources pane, I'm going to click the first button. Looks like a hand holding a folder. All right, and as you can see down here at the bottom, we have network and SharePoint. So if I had this imaginary X drive, I could go out to network and find it, or I could go to SharePoint. Now, if you're doing this for real and you don't see your network drive, probably the best thing to do is go map it out in Windows. So let's say you call it the X drive. Well, if you haven't actually mapped it, then Flare probably can't find where it is, but you go map a drive to it, and then it should show up in the list. Now, I'm not going to go out to a network. I'm going to go to my desktop. Okay, so my file's on my desktop. I'm going to select desktop. Okay, and that folder appears in the list. And all the files that are stored in that folder will show up. And I can add any of these that I want to my project. Now, a little convenience thing here. You might know right away that you're going to bring in a whole bunch of external resources. And if you want some examples of external resources, company logos, very common external resources. So we're bringing them into our project and using them. It might be videos that some other department has created that you want to use. So I see that not as often as logos, but that's an example. But if you're going to be bringing in these external resources, especially if there's a lot like company logos, if you go ahead and store them in the same folder, then you only have to add one folder. So let's say I have 20 images I want to bring in. If we can go ahead wherever they are and put them in one folder together, then I just add that folder and I see them all. Another kind of payoff of that is later on, let's say that there's a new image that I could use. Well, if they put it in that folder, when I open this up, I'll see it and realize, oh, that looks interesting. Maybe I want to use that too. So it can kind of remind me that there are some new ones too. If things are scattered all over the place, then I have to have a lot of folders in here, and it's not as obvious to me that there are new ones. They're in some folder that I haven't had as external resource. Another interesting payoff of the folders, once you add a folder as an external resource, that's Flare wide. It's not project specific. So going with my logo example, if I just open a Flare project and add my logos folder, then even if I have 5 projects, as soon as I go to external resources, the logo folder is already there. I don't have to go add it again. That's kind of convenient, I think. Now I want to add this image here, XYZ logo. Okay. So to add it to my project, I select it, and if there are a bunch of them, I can select a bunch of them. I'm just doing one. And then we click the second button. Okay. And Flare's gonna make a copy of it, so it's asking us, hey, where do you want to put it? We could put it wherever we want. I'll just click OK and put it in the content folder. Okay. And Flare's making a copy of it. Right? And there's kind of, to me, this is probably the most powerful feature of the of external resources, but it's kind of hiding down here. Keep files synchronized. I think you should check that. It's rare that I don't check that, very rare. Synchronize is telling Flare, all right, remember where we went and found this. And if you synchronize, anytime you want, you can ask Flare, hey, have they changed, in this case, have they changed the logo? And Flare will go check to see if it's changed, and if it has, it'll tell you, and you can re-import it. All right, so it's not as automated as bringing content with a Flare import file. Flare import file has an auto re-import. You build a target, automatically re-imports if it changed. This one will not automatically happen at any time. It doesn't happen when they change it. It doesn't prompt you that it's changed. It doesn't happen when you build. You have to check. All you have to do is click a button, but you do have to remember to check. It's called synchronize. I'll show it to you. So I would check that just so we can easily synchronize. It sounds like a little thing, like, well, so what? I can go see if it changed. I can go out in Windows and find the file myself. True, but why waste your time doing that even if it only takes 2 minutes? Why spend 2 minutes on it if Flare can do it in less than 2 seconds? Plus, if you have a bunch, like 10 of them, that starts to add up. It's like now I'm spending 10 minutes checking to see if these files change, whereas Flare could check all 10 of them in 2 seconds. Way better. So I'm going to synchronize it. Flare makes a copy of it, adds it to my project, and it has a little kind of orange icon on it. So that's Flare's way of saying, okay, I'm watching it. Anytime you want, you can ask me if it has changed. But just, again, if someone changes it, it does not automatically re-import it. It doesn't prompt you to re-import it. It doesn't change the icon. It doesn't happen when you build. You have to click synchronize. I'll show you that. Now, we know it hasn't changed, but we can pretend. To make sure it hasn't changed, we click synchronize files here in the project ribbon. And it hasn't changed, it's blank. If it had changed, then Flare would tell us, and we can highlight it and click synchronize. Okay. Now, something you might be wondering about, what if I do that and then somebody deletes it or moves it or renames it? Well, when you synchronize it, then Flare's going to say, hey, I can't find it. And you'll have to click Manage Mappings and go find where they renamed it or moved it. Hopefully they didn't delete it. So you'll know. It won't mess you up. You still have the original old one before they moved it or renamed it or deleted it. But you can't synchronize it if it can't find it. So it's going to be annoying if they rename it or move it, but it's not the end of the world. So a best practice here is kind of negotiate with the other person that might be changing the content. Hey, could you You can name whatever you want, put it wherever you want, but please don't rename it and move it because you're making my life a lot harder. Hopefully they'll agree to that. Okay, so it hasn't changed, and I can click cancel. Now, I think there was a question about this, so just as a reminder, if a file is stored in a Flare project, I would want to bring it in as using an import file, because the import file is more powerful. Just to open it and show you, it has the auto re-import option. And that means if I bring it in with an import file, Flare can automatically re-import it when I build. Less things for me to keep up with. If it's not stored in another Flare project, I don't really have a choice. I have to use an external resource. And then that means if someone changes it, I have to click synchronize. So that's how you kind of make the decision between those two. Now, this arrow going back, yes, with an external resource, I could change the logo. And if I change it, my copy of it, and click synchronize, Flare would know that I changed it. And I could send the change back. I think it's much more likely you want to reuse, in this case, the logo, but you're not even supposed to change it. So it's much more likely you're using this as a one-way thing. I'm going to bring in the logo. I'm not going to change it. I only want to check to see if the other person changed it. But that is possible. Now, if you're worried, well, what if I bring it in and accidentally change? Okay. When you click synchronize, you can tell right here that you did that. That doesn't mean that you have to send your change back to the other person. In fact, you could re-import it, overwrite your messed up one, the one you changed, with the fixed one. But that is possible if you needed to do that. That's what we're going to look at next, actually. Okay, so now some variations. The things I'm going to show you, the next two, are special cases. They don't happen nearly as often as the first two that I showed you, but these are some other ways that you could share content. All right, so imagine we have some content. We want to use it in multiple Flare projects. But typically when we do that, we are only changing it in one place. If you think about the global project, you might have content in a global project, using my example, you're using an A, B, and C. But if it changes, you go to global and change it, and then send the change back to A, B, and C. But what if you want to reuse content, let's say in 2 projects, but you want to be able to change it in either project, and if you change it, send the change to the other project? Now, as I said, that's a special case. Now, you might even be wondering, well, why the world would ever do that? I see this most often when it happens when we have 2 different departments. Okay, so as an example, imagine that one project is the documentation department, and one project is owned by the training department. And there's some content in one of the documentation projects that also can be used in the training project. And they want to share that content. They've kind of agreed, hey, if this changes, if we're updating it, it doesn't matter who updates it. We don't want to have to update it twice. My example is going to be a snippet. Okay, so we have the snippet. Happens to be right now in the documentation project. We want to reuse it in the training project. But maybe there's a typo. We want to allow the training department to fix the typo and send the change back to the documentation department to help them out. Now you might already be thinking, shouldn't we just put it in the global project? Normally, yes, we could. But if you scale this up, you can see how in a special case, this might be, I want to be cautious, this isn't a normal thing we do, but in certain situations, this could be useful. what if there are 10 documentation projects? We already have a global project, bringing in content into all 10 of those. Maybe there's 10 training projects too. Within those 10 on each side, there's one doc project and one training project, and they want to share. And maybe some of the other ones want to share between them. When you have a lot of projects like that, do I really want to clutter up the global project with these little things that are only shared between 2 projects out of 10 for each department? At some point, the answer might be no. If the answer is no, you could try this instead. Now we're going to use that arrow that goes back. The global project could be the source of an external resource. Or even, if you wanted, Project A in the documentation group could be the source for Project A in the training department. And being able to share the content between them and change it in either one. So still an external resource, but pulling from a Flare project so that we can go back and forth. Okay, so I'm going to open this sample training project. Now my goal is I want to bring in just a snippet from the documentation group's Project A. I want to bring that into my training Project A. They want to share the snippet and be able to change it in the doc version of Project A or the training version of Project A and share the change. And again, my example was, what if there's a typo? Okay. And if you're still struggling with another, why would I set this up? Going back to why don't we put it in the global project? Remember, sometimes we restrict access. I've seen groups, and maybe you are set up like this or thinking about it. You're thinking, no, I don't know. Let's pretend we're in the documentation group. We have that global project. I don't know if I even want the training department changing things in the global project. Not to pick on the training department. So if that's the case, you can do it this way and still keep them out of the global project. And to be fair, I've worked with groups too, where the training department say, we don't want to have to change things in the global project. We don't even want to be blamed if something gets messed up. Okay, with this model, you're still sharing content between the projects and between the departments, and still, in my scenario, only the documentation group even has access to change things in global. Those things are still very, very locked down. So again, it's going to be an external resource. This time I'm going to go to my documentation Project A. So let's go find that. Okay. Now we had a question, could it be like a Google Drive? And just as a reminder, I mentioned it needs to be something that ideally you can map a drive to in Windows. So more like a file server or SharePoint. Typically something out on the web you can't map a drive to, which means Flare can't see it either. So if it's out somewhere and you have to go out in your browser to get to it, then you probably can't get to it using an external resource. All right, so I added that folder. And I'm just going to bring in a snippet. Go find it. Okay, so here's my snippet as an example. To add that to my project, again, I click this copy button, the arrow pointing to a folder. And again, Flare says, hey, where do you want to put it? I'll put it in the snippets folder. And I'm going to synchronize it. That way we can swap it back and forth. All right. I now have a copy of it here in the training project. There it is. It has the circle icon. Flare's watching it. I can open it up. And you can see I can change it. So I changed it. When I synchronize it, see, Flare knows. It's telling me, hey, you changed it. Do you want to send the change back to the documentation department? Yes, I do. I click synchronize, it's going to update it in the other Flare project. There. Okay, so kind of a special case, but still pretty cool, still useful. All right, Francesca, you asked about what's the difference between bringing it as an external resource or inserting as an image. The synchronize is the main power of the external resources. If you add it as an external resource, one thing I like about it is having the folder listed. So if there's a bunch of them, like my example with the logos, if there's 10 of them, I'd rather go ahead and add as an external resource just to get the folder in there, and I could easily add all 10 at once to my project, and then I could start using them in my topics when I need them. I kind of have them ready to go. Whereas if there's 10 of them, I have to do insert image 10 times. But when you do go into insert image, just to show you, that same checkbox is kind of hiding in there. So just as a demonstration, just so you can see this. So that's the same thing we saw with external resources. So if you do use insert image and you check keep files synchronized, you can still synchronize it. It just doesn't show the folder over here. It's a little difference, but I would think about how many of them there are. And again, if there's 10 of them, I'd rather go ahead and use external resource, have them all 10 listed in here with the folder and everything. But it's not the end of the world if you've already done all 10 of them. You could still synchronize them individually. Yep. So it ends up evening out. Let's get back. All right, another option. What if you're thinking, when I start a new project, I think we had a similar question to this. I'm starting a new project. There's a whole bunch of content I want in my new project. Right. Now, if what you're saying is, I'm starting project C, there's a whole bunch of content in the global project that I want to be linked to project C, I would create project C and then do exactly what I showed you at the beginning. Create a Flare import file and link project C to the global project. Okay. And same thing, external resources. If you're making project C and you're saying, hey, I need all those images, external resources, go ahead and make project C, link it to the global project, and then bring in all the external resources too. But let's take a slightly different scenario. What if you're saying, project C is going to be really similar to project B. There's a lot of content I wish was in my project at the beginning. Boilerplate content. I'm going to change it. It's not exactly the same. It's just a starting point. Now, something like, I need to have an overview topic. Now, the content overview topic is going to be a little bit different for project C, but it's real similar to what I had in project B. So what I'm describing here to make it very clear, you have some files, whether they're topics or whatever, you want to use them as a starting point, and you're going to change them. Their end result will not be shared. It's not exactly the same in multiple projects. It's almost like a template that you're going to modify. What some people will do is they'll use an import file, import, and then start modifying everything. I really would not do that. Really, really don't like that idea. To me, an import file, the whole concept is sharing content. Making it an import file, bringing in a whole bunch of files, and then intentionally changing them it's really going against the whole idea of the import file to begin with, and it's really easy to make a mistake. So if your goal is, I have a whole bunch of content, I wanted to use as a starting point for a new project, why not keep it simple? This is what I would do. I'd go find the project. You can even, your starting point, you can name it template project if you want. I want to have a copy of that I can modify. I'm going to go out in Windows and make a copy of it. Paste it. And if this is supposed to be doc project C, I'm going to name it that. Go ahead and rename the project file. I like to keep the name of the project file in sync with the name of the folder. So I did that here. They don't have to match. It just kind of makes sense that they would match, but that's up to you. So see, by doing it this way, there's no connection. And I'm not going to get confused and think there is a connection. I know I went out on Windows and made a copy of it. Doc Project C has no connection to the template anymore. I can open it up and change anything I want, delete things, add things to it. They can't even accidentally mess each other up. So I would not use an external resource. I wouldn't use an import file in this scenario if I'm planning on changing everything. I just wanted a starting point. How could we make a whole Flare template? And when we go to make a new project, select File, New Project, and pick our template? Sure, you can. I mean, you can do that. That seems like more work to me. What I did took 5 seconds. I have to go through the whole wizard to do it that way. End result will be the same. Not knocking this. I'm just, like I said, I like the easiest way. My way, I think, is the easiest way. And our last example would be, so there's a copy paste. So our last example is we have a whole bunch of projects. Maybe you do have A, B, and C. I want to build a target that contains content from all of them, A, B, and C. Now there's lots of ways to do that actually. You could open up project A, build a target, put it somewhere, open B, build a target, put it somewhere, open C, build a target, put it somewhere. They all need to be the same kind of target. And depending on the output type, you could potentially merge them together on the server. There's a way to merge on a server. There's also a way to merge in a project using a TOC to merge A, B, and C together. But maybe you've tried that before. The challenge with merging on a server or merging kind of before you build using the table of contents is it only works in certain targets. And even if you're looking at it, if you think about it and you look into that approach, maybe you've done that before and you think, okay, what I want to create works with this approach. Eventually you might want to create something else. And then you're like, oh, it doesn't work. So you're kind of locked in. I don't like that. And one of the challenges with that is most people overwhelmingly create HTML5 targets, and most people create top-nav HTML5 targets. If you want to create a top-nav HTML5 target, well, you can't merge on the server. You can't merge in the TOC. But hey, I want to create top nav and I want to merge, so how do we do it? There is a way to do it, and the nice thing is, the way I'm about to show you, it doesn't matter what you're creating. You create anything, you can make a Word document if you want, so this approach always works. That has some interesting other advantages to it too. So it always works, even with top nav, and there's some other benefits to it. I call this idea, it doesn't really have a name, so I just named it a build project. Okay, so here's what we're trying to do. I want to build a target, maybe I'm going to put it out on the web as top nav, that combines content from A, B, and C. Mine's going to be a knowledge base. It's kind of like a reverse global project. We're going to make an import file. We'll just do A and B. We'll import all the content from A, all the content from B into the build project, and then in the build project we can build our target. Let's take a look at it. All right, so here's my build project. I went ahead and made the import files, but just to show them to you. So I have one to import everything from A, just like with any import file. Doesn't mean I have to bring in everything from A, but I'm going to bring in everything. And I have one for B. Okay, so we'll go ahead and import. I've already brought over A, so we'll go ahead and do this. Okay. Okay, let's make sure they both came over. Okay, we have all the A's and all the B's. Good. You can see the TOCs came over. I named them TOC A and B. Now, when you set this up, and you might be worried about this now, what if they have the same file in both of them? Like, what if I'm using a global project? I brought the style sheet in A. I brought it into B. Well, it should be the same if it came from the global project. So yes, if I import A, it adds the style sheet along with everything else. I import B, it's going to add the style sheet and it's going to overwrite the one that came from A, but they're the same, so it doesn't matter. Okay, so files that are the same and have the same name intentionally, no big deal. What you have to watch out for, and that's why I name my files like this, files that are in the same folder that have the same name have to have different names so they don't overwrite. You will have to coordinate that. So in A, I name them A, and in B, I name them B. Even though they are still in a documentation folder in A and a documentation folder in B, they did not overwrite each other. If I just made a folder named Product A in that project and put the files in there, and in B, I named a folder Product B, even if they had the same name, because they're in different folders, they would not overwrite. So you could use folders to differentiate them. You could use file names to differentiate them. You'll know when you import, it'll tell you. It's even going to be color code. It's going to tell you, hey, this file exists and it's different. So you click cancel and go resolve that. So there's a little setup at the beginning, getting the files with different names or different folders. But to show you the end result, I brought over these two TOCs, and I'm going to use my TOC merging trick. I'm just going to drag everything from TOC A, TOC B in here. I'll name this Project A. I'll name this Project B. So I'm going to have all the topics from A and B, plus a home topic and a what's new topic that I'm keeping in my build project because it applies to everything. It's not A or B specific. We'll build our target. And it's going to include home and what's new and everything from A and everything from B. All right, and there it is. I have all my Project B topics, all of my Project A topics, and what's new and home. All right, so I've showed you lots of different options. I know there are some questions I haven't answered, but those are the 5 things I wanted to show you. And before we get to the questions, I think Jen.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Scott, so much. That was so helpful. I learned so much. A couple things before we get to some remaining questions that have come in. If you have any, feel free to jot them down as I go through these really, really quickly. As an attendee today, you do get $100 off your next advanced training course. If you want to learn a little bit more about project linking and some options, we do touch on that in the Flare single sourcing training, among a lot of other subjects. So if you want to take some of your single sourcing skills and your CSS skills to the next level, encourage you to check out these 2 classes. The outlines and all the modules that we cover are available on our website. You can always contact us directly at sales or contact your rep if you have questions about them and registering, but you do get $100 off the registration for each course for being an attendee today. And then the next reminder, before we get to the questions. Mad World's coming up. We have our learning conference here in San Diego. We're going to be at the Hotel del Coronado. If you're not familiar with it, it's a beautiful historic hotel here in San Diego. It's just a stunning location. We'd love to have you join us there. We're also going to be in Europe. Our first European tour will be this year, and we'll be in Prague in September. And so both of these conferences are up on our website. The URL is right there on the slide, or you can get there from the homepage, but the schedule, the sessions, the speakers, it's all up there, including all the accommodation information. Please check it out. We would love to have you. There is a registration discount for both of these. It's expiring March 31st, so it's a really good time to save. We hope to see you all there. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you're from the Great White North here in North America, please come to San Diego in June, because you'll have a chance to thaw out properly, because it's always so nice. All right, so that being said, let's get to a couple questions that have come in through the last few minutes here of the hour. Here's a question. Let's see. If I have just a few topics that should share from the parent company Flare project to the operations division Flare project, am I better to change the parent company to global? Only about 15 or 20 topics needs to waterfall over to operations, as they mostly have their own unique content. That's a good question.
I always try to think ahead. So you might be thinking right now it's only 15, but a good question to ask is, okay, is it 15 right now, and then 2 years from now it might be 100? But if you realize, yeah, 2 years from now it's still going to be 15, I would go ahead and make a global project, move the 15 files to the global project, import them into the current project. It just overwrites them, but it links them. And then the other project, import them. So if there's 1,000 files and only 15 are shared, I don't want to clutter up the global project with almost 95% that's not shared. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, great. And here's another good question. What do you do if you already created projects A, B, and C that have content that could be in a global project? Would you create the global project, import the content from project A, then import the global project to A, B, and C, and then delete the old content? Kind of along the same lines. It's a good question, though.
Yep, I do the exact same thing. You're totally on the right track. I'd make a global project, move the content. I just do it out in Windows. As part of the follow-up, I can send you the steps of how to move to a global project. So I put the content in the global project, import what I want into A, import what I want into B, import what I want into C. When you import, it realizes that it already exists. It just overwrites it and then links it. And that linking is the part that we want.
Okay, here's a good question. How does one restrict access to a global project? I know you mentioned that in the beginning. That's a good point.
It's totally up to you. If ideally you're using source control, so just through source control you could control who can even get to the global project and make changes. So maybe they only have read access to it rather than write access. And you can also do those kinds of things on a network drive or even through SharePoint. So it's something outside of Flare. It's however you already control who has access to what, you just leverage that.
Great. I think we have time for one more here. So if we didn't get to your question, don't worry, we will be sending out the question and answer document. Here's a good question. For importing project A and project B into the build project, are there settings that will auto update the build project, or do you need to re-import A and B to pick up changes?
Remember that option when you have a Flare import file, the auto re-import. So just in the build project, we'll make sure that's checked too, auto re-import. So the first time you have to click import like I did, but now we just go change A and B. I don't change anything in here. I just leave these files as they are. When I'm ready to rebuild my KB, open this and just build it. It's going to take longer because Flare's got to go re-import everything that changed in A and B, but Flare will take care of it. I don't even have to click re-import anymore because I have auto re-import checked.
Yeah, good tip. Well, we are at the end of the hour. I know a couple questions are coming in, so we'll keep this open for just a few more seconds. Feel free to jot them down. This was so helpful, Scott, as I mentioned. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today. I hope everybody took away a few pearls of wisdom from this session. And so, again, thanks so much. I hope that you'll join us on another webinar. Hope you'll join us at Mad World or join us in a training class. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions at all. But again, thank you, Scott. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week, and we'll see you on the next webinar session. So thanks again. Take care, everybody.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.